few more minutes. It is 6 o'clock, but again, I'll just wait a few more minutes for for the members to just jump on. Here we go. There's Joseph.
He will not. He just, every time he wanders. And he like looks at you. I'm like, oh, tomorrow.
Okay, it's 6:01, and it looks like we have a good number. We're all set, right, Julie? So I will begin. My name is Renee Kinsella. I'm the chair of the Budget, Education, and City Services Committee of CB5. Julie Chu is the co-chair of the committee. This evening, we have 3 items on the agenda. First is Laura Atlas, who's the Director of External Affairs for Test and Treat Corps of New York Health and Hospitals. And she's going to provide us an update on the 3 HERC. Those are the Humanitarian Emergency Response and Relief Centers. Those are the sites located in our district. And then we have Derek Gomez of MOIA, which is the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. And he's going to speak to us generally about the services available to the asylees and give us an update generally on what is happening with the migrants. And then we are going to move to comments on the budget, followed by new business. A brief overview of how this committee works. Each presenter will have the opportunity to present to the committee, and after their presentation is concluded, the committee will be permitted to ask questions of the presenter. And when all of the committee's questions have been answered, members of the public will be permitted to ask questions of the presenter. And once all of the questions have been addressed, the committee goes into business session, and this is when only members of the BEX committee discuss the issue amongst themselves and determine what action to take. Tonight, we have no action items. So when the committee does have an action item, the issue will be voted on by all present members of the BEX committee. And then should a resolution be passed, it's presented to the full CB5 board for a vote. And that vote is the final position of our board. Again, we don't have any action items for this evening, so I will get right to it. And I am going to welcome Laura Atlas. Laura, is Laura here? I think I see you down there for the Test and Treat Corps of the New York City Health and Hospitals.
Laura's here.
Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Really appreciate you talking to us about the HERC sites.
Of course.
And just for the committee, if you could just explain what they are so they understand what we're talking about here.
Yeah, give me 1 second. I'm sorry. Hold on. I'm going to try to.
No worries. I do want to add, we also have this evening Robin Forst, and she is with the Community Affairs Unit of the Mayor's Office, and she is the CB5 attaché, I guess.
Hello.
Hi, Laura.
All right.
Hi.
Video. We're doing well. Thanks for having me, everybody. So I'll kick it off, and then there may be another panelist, but I will start. So as folks are aware, last year, there began to be a large influx of asylum seekers coming into New York City, predominantly at the time via buses chartered by southern states and cities. At this point, I will say one of the big differences is that there are multiple pathways by which people are arriving at this point. There are CBOs at the border, for instance, that are actually giving people tickets and having them come up here to make sure that people have access to resources. I think one of the things that was sort of uncovered in all of this is how much New York City is doing that other places are simply not able to do or haven't committed to doing in terms of resources. So when the system began to be fully inundated in the late summer, early fall, we created what were called HERCs, which are Humanitarian Emergency Response and Relief Centers. They are specifically for asylum seekers. We currently have 5 in New York City right now. All but one of them are located in Manhattan. The majority of them are in Midtown. So, and the majority of them are also for families with children. That continues to be the population that we see the largest amount of people in. It is also a population that typically can be more challenging to help reconnect and reticket because it's much easier to connect one person to somebody than 5 people, let's say, which is the household size. So I'll talk about the sort of different HERCs that we have. I think uniquely, HERCs are really meant to understand with each individual family and person sort of the story of how they were able to reach New York City and what they need to kind of what we call complete the journey. So for some people, that means that they will reunite with family or friends who may be in New York City, maybe in other places. We've reticketed people to back to Texas. We've reticketed them all over. Anywhere that people kind of identify friends or family, we make sure that they're able to reach, planes, trains, and automobiles. We do it all. Additionally, we've also started to work with local CBOs and houses of worship who have been kind of informally hosting people as well. And so folks are also referred in through them. And some of those folks may have been here a little bit longer. Predominantly, the populations are from South America, but we certainly also have people who are from West Africa and other parts of the world as well, where they are seeking asylum. In order to be eligible for a HERC, as we call them, you have to be able to provide the papers that are given at Border Patrol, which show that you are seeking asylum. So they're essentially the equivalent of parole papers. They state when the person crossed the border and that they are applying for asylum, and they'll also have other related information. And so when people provide that, if we have space at the HERCs, we bring them into the HERC system. Nobody is required to enter a HERC. Nobody is required to stay in a HERC. People can kind of come and go at will. There are a bunch of services built into the HERC system that distinguishes it from the DHS system. I think it's important to say that the DHS system is really focused on making sure that people who are struggling to find a house, a permanent housing situation, are able to get involved into a system that will help them do that. Whereas the HERC system is really about trying to understand what services we can provide to support people while they seek asylum. So built into the HERC systems are a few different unique traits that I'll go through. For the families with children sites, which again are predominantly the sites that we operate, they tend to be very large. They are much larger than shelters. The Row is the largest of all of the HERCs. That's exclusively for families with young children. There are upwards of 3,000 people living in there. We have DOE on site regularly to enroll kids in school. If you ever happen to be by the Row at 7 or 8 in the morning, you'll see kids lining up for school buses in huge crowds. We're really proud of how quickly we've been able to get kids in school. And hand in hand with that, we have on-site clinical services at all of the HERCs. And in particular at the family HERCs, we have the ability to provide vaccinations for all childhood illnesses in the actual HERC. We have an entire dedicated conference space for that, and as well as basic clinical services, COVID testing, treatments, kind of anything you can imagine. If people are in need of a higher level of care, if they have chronic illnesses, for instance, there are people who have crossed the border knowing that they're epileptic, but they weren't able to bring their medicine across. We get them involved in a wider network and continuum of care through H&H. So we have Metro Health Plus on site at all the HERCs as well, enrolling people in Medicaid. Most of the folks in the HERC system are eligible for emergency Medicaid. Additionally, we make sure that if you have any kind of immediate issues, anything emergent, that we can transfer you to one of the H&H facilities. And of course, mental health is a big part of this as well. People have been through really, challenging journeys to get here and have seen and experienced extremely challenging things. So we also work with the Survivors of Torture Clinic, which is a program unique to H&H. There's it started off at Bellevue and it has expanded to Elmhurst. The frontline staff, who I should say are 90% bilingual, predominantly they speak English and Spanish, but we also have Portuguese speakers, French Creole speakers, a whole host of folks to make sure that people can communicate in the language they are most comfortable with all the time. If somebody should speak a language that we don't speak on site, we don't have somebody who speaks it in person, we have access to Language Line. Language Line is the same program that is used in H&H facilities themselves so that doctors can speak with patients. It's a very common service. It has up to 250 languages in it. So there should never be a point where somebody is not able to communicate because of a language barrier. And sorry, that was a little bit of a tangent. To go back to, we're talking about language, medical care. I'm gonna keep going, but we might need to, I may have forgotten why I was going down that rabbit hole, but I think it's real. Oh, mental health. So we can connect people to the Roberto Clemente Center. We actually built out a dedicated pathway. That is a center that's in Lower Manhattan. It is I believe the only entirely bilingual clinic in the city. They are able to provide mental health services and other services. The Survivors of Torture Clinic have come and trained frontline staff in kind of how to recognize signs of distress, especially related to torture. So these are really important tools. Additionally, we also have the Salvation Army on site. They give out vouchers for folks who can go then to the Salvation Army and pick out whatever clothes they want. We also receive donations from the Mayor's Fund. So I know a lot of folks have been amazing when it comes to donating all kinds of wonderful supplies. Please know that they do get to us. We are able to provide them, without any barrier at the Hercs. Additionally, there are supply rooms where people can come and get kind of unlimited shampoo, toiletries, baby diapers, pack and plays, anything you can really imagine that you would need. I like to call it Costco because it's sort of like a giant warehouse that people can just, access as they need. Additionally, we provide food on site, 3 meals a day, as well as many, many snacks. You'll see kids as they're coming in and out, they always tend to have an apple or a juice or something in hand. We want to make sure that people have all of those comforts. And then, of course, reticketing and legal services. These are the thing that really distinguishes the mission. We have people come in all the time who say, I didn't know I was coming here, or I didn't really know anything about this. I'm actually trying to go somewhere else. Or, you know what, I need a couple of days or maybe even a couple of weeks to understand sort of like what is happening and what I need to do to finally be able to settle. And so it's really important that we are able to facilitate that. So we have folks who facilitate all day long the ability to reconnect with family. We have phones that can make international calls all the time if that's a factor. And then as soon as that connection is identified, we can reticket people, and we certainly reticket people all the time. It's not at the rate of 100% for sure, but we're reticketing at least a few families every day, and certainly on the single adult side, we reticket a lot more people. So that is kind of the general flow and overview. I'm happy to take questions. I think I see Moya on also, and so they can also talk about sort of the broader context here if they want to.
Thank you so much, Laura. Laura, could you just explain what reticketing means for us?
Yeah, it's a broad term, definitely meant to be. So basically, when somebody says, I have a family member or a relative or friends who are willing to take us in, but they are located in such and such place, I don't know how to get there, we subsidize the ticket. Whether, again, planes, trains, automobiles, whatever it takes to get you there, we will make sure. So that was really important for us that we were able to do that. And, there have been nights where people are like booking plane tickets for the next day at 8 a.m.
Got it. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I'm going to open it up to the committee for questions. I see, who do I see? I see Mary.
Thanks, Renee. And thanks, Laura, for your presentation. You mentioned 3 of the 4 facilities are in Manhattan. Is the other one the Franklin Center that used to be the intake point for women, and has that whole situation been straightened out?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So there's actually 5 sites, 4 in Manhattan, and the newest one to open is in Brooklyn. It's in the cruise terminal. The Franklin Avenue site is for women, but it's in the DHS system. So the DHS system, again, like I sort of referenced at the beginning, is really meant to help people who have kind of an emergency housing need, and then ultimately is meant to connect people to permanent housing. And people can still choose, like anybody could choose to enter DHS if they don't want to enter the Hercs, and vice versa if there is room at the Hercs. That's kind of the one difference. The Hercs do fill up, and they stay very full, whereas DHS, because of right to shelter, is permanently kind of expanding at this point to accommodate, anybody else.
Could I just ask a quick second question? Your description of the
Of course.
robust meals and snacks is kind of divergent from the reporting that we've seen, especially on WNBC. Could you address that issue?
I don't think I know what, if you can show me the reporting, I'm happy to address it. But I mean, I can talk about what the food situation is at the Hercs, but I don't know the specific report you're referring to. So at the Hercs, breakfast and lunch are provided at the same time to everybody. That is intentional. We want to make sure that if people are going to school or they're going to work, that they're not having to come back to the Herc to get lunch. So we put everything out at like 6:30, 7 in the morning every day. It's all shelf stable, sandwiches, etc. We actually do surveys we have done surveys to make sure that the food that we're serving is kind of what people want to eat, that they're enjoying it. We've discontinued meals because we've heard that, people didn't enjoy it. We've increased the number of meals for certain things because people liked it better. And so we've adjusted. And then for dinner, we have hot dinner that's served beginning around like usually 6:30, sometimes 7. It's all hot dinner. And then we've learned how to sort of continuously phase dinner out over a couple of hours so that if people can't get there at 6:30, their meals continue to be served warm, even if they weren't there at the beginning of dinner. Another thing that I think is really interesting, and the row is a little bit different because common space is harder to come by, but most of the sites have common space. And we've learned that this is really important, that people meet in the cafeteria, they get to know each other, they have similar stories, they've been through similar things, and that this is a great way for them to kind of build a community. And so we've really tried to, in the Hercs, other than the row where physically it's not as easy to do this, but certainly at the Stewart, there's a giant ballroom. That's the cafeteria. People are literally eating under a beautiful chandelier. At the Watson, there's a huge cafeteria that's kind of built into the space that we've just fully operationalized as a cafeteria. And the Walcott also it's a much smaller site. It's only for single adult women and adult families. And that site also has the ability to kind of congregate together. Because again, we've learned that this is really important, that folks are looking for community and that this is an easy way to kind of foster that. There are also snacks available 24/7 outside of the meal schedule. So like apples, bananas, baby formula, all of this. Every single floor of the Hercs has like a distribution table in the elevator bank that's permanently filled with these types of staples. And of course, if there's like some kind of emergency and somebody missed dinner or whatever, they can alert staff and staff will help them make sure that they get, access to the food that was served.
Thanks, Laura. Bradley.
Thanks, Renee. I had 2 questions, if that's all right. The first one is, I just want to know, how long on average are people staying at these Hercs?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of, there is no good way to answer this. Again, the single adult population tends to churn much more quickly because it's logical, right? It's much easier to take in one person than to take in a whole family. So we see a decent amount of move outs on the single adult side. The family side, and this is true across the whole social service spectrum, right? It's true of the DHS system too. It's just more challenging. They need more space for families. It's a lot more, it takes a lot more resources. And so we do see move outs, but it's nowhere near kind of the level that you would see with the single adult population.
So in terms of like length of time, can you help me
Oh, it's all over the
contextualize?
Yeah, I mean, it's all over the place. We have people who come in the beginning, it was very quick, I would say, namely because people were being sent up here by other states and cities and didn't know why. And they were getting here and they were saying, oh no, I was trying to actually go to San Antonio. That's where my family is. So in the beginning, we were able to, on the single adult side, we moved out something like 40 or 50% of people within a few days. At this point, with the CBO referrals coming in, with folks coming in who have actually been in the city probably for a while, but we're not in the DHS system, we're, let's say, living in, subpar conditions in a house of worship, they are now in our system, and there's going to be less movement there. The longer that folks are here, the more likely they are to have established a connection and a community here. So, we definitely try to encourage people to connect with anyone they know and see if it's possible for them to keep going through the journey. But there are some people for whom that's not an option. And so, again, some people come in, I wish there were a more simple answer. Some people come in and they know immediately where they want to go, and we get them going as soon as we can. There are some people who come in and after a couple of days or a couple of weeks say, you know what, I have a cousin or an aunt or something who I think we can move in with. As soon as somebody tells us that they have that connection, we want to reticket them and we want to make sure that they're sent on their way. There are also people who leave and they don't tell us why. So I think there's a little bit of mystery on that side. And that's true in the DHS system too, by the way. Like, a lot of people leave DHS without kind of announcing a reason. But yeah, it's definitely, for every single case, it's going to be different. And for some people, leaving is probably not going to be an option.
Okay, thank you. And then the other one was, I had a question about, so all of the people in the HERCs are seeking asylum. So where typically are those asylum cases going to be heard? Are they back at sort of their point of origin, or are they happening here?
It's a great question. And Moya, if you want to chime in, you guys are really the experts on this, but I can say I'm more the expert on the actual sites, but I will tell you what I have learned, and then Moya can tell me if I have mislearned. So when people receive their kind of date at the border, they don't have to physically return to the place that they were assigned. They can do it, they can do check-ins and they can do it remotely for the actual appointment. But unfortunately, this is not something that is very well known, I think, or is well understood. And so a lot of the challenges, people do think they have to go to Chicago or to, San Francisco, and they can actually do this remotely, but it's very challenging. And then separate from that, there is like the ICE check-in, which led to the issue at Federal Plaza, which is not necessarily related to a hearing. That's just basically your check-in saying, I'm still here, I'm still in line, I want to continue to pursue asylum. Unfortunately, I think if you talk to people who've been in this space for a long time, and again, Moya, you should chime in here, there are people who will wait years and years and years and years to even have their actual kind of day in court to really adjudicate if they can receive, asylum. So it's a very challenging process, and there's certainly a backlog.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. There's a notoriously long asylum backlog, going up to 6 years for people to have their claims adjudicated. So typically people within 1 year have to file for asylum, submit that application, though there are some exceptions. But yeah, the backlog does take a really long time to figure out. But as soon as people put in their asylum application, they're eligible for work permits. So that's one of the big issues that clients have been bringing up, that there's a lot of challenges and being able to get that work authorization. But as soon as they put in that asylum claim, 5 months to the day, they'll be able to get a work permit. And folks are working already in the informal economy. There's a long history in the city and in this country of people working without authorization, doing what they need to do to support their families, both in this country and back home. So people figure out how to make it work. But yeah, the asylum application and then also the asylum process in its entirety is known to be pretty long and onerous, but folks are figuring out the information, and Moya is figuring out how to stand up an operation with lawyers, with pro bono attorneys that work in the private sector to best support folks where they're at.
Thank you.
Thank
Just
you.
a question, do each of the asylees have legal representation, or it's sort of hit and miss at this stage, or how's that assigned?
Yeah, so it's challenge. This is a big challenge. It's a resource challenge as much as it is a people person challenge or people power challenge. So we do offer legal resources at the HERCs. They're not necessarily lawyers. They're people who can kind of arm you with information, talk you through the process, but they're not getting legal counsel at the HERC itself. There are, certain resources available for folks so that they can have access to their own attorney. Some people choose to, seek one out outside of that system. But the truth is that the scale of this is just so enormous that, being able to provide a lawyer for, even 100 cases each is a tall task. And Moya can talk about the work they've been doing because this is really their bread and butter.
So just to continue down that line, that's a good overview, Laura. But there isn't enough pro bono immigration attorneys to provide the services that everyone needs. And also the field is dealing with their own backlogs of previous crises. If you just think in the last few years, there was the Ukraine crisis, the Haitian crisis with the assassination of their president, the collapse of the Afghan government, and all the folks that came through there. The field is really doing some spectacular work, and with a lot of those previous crises, and then just the consistent migration that comes into the United States on a year-to-year basis. They're dealing with a lot, and the city is trying to figure out the best way to fund best practices, figure out how to get people the support they need. But it is this bigger issue because of the scale. As Laura mentioned, it is largely a question of how do you provide these services for the about 25,000 people that remain in the city that we know of, with 42,000 having cycled through the city since the start of this crisis.
Understood. Mary, I see your hand.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we're having a separate conversation about the men who are camped out. My understanding is a big issue that they're articulating is a lack of medical testing in people with active COVID cases and diagnosis of TB. Is somebody available to address that, or are we having a separate conversation about that?
Happy to talk about it. I would just go ahead and say, again, every HERC is outfitted with a clinic, literally a clinic on site. There are medical providers. They are there 24/7. They immediately test people when they come into the HERC for COVID. Anybody who is transitioning over the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal is tested for COVID as soon as they are before they even get on the bus. There's COVID testing always available at all HERCs. We have a unique model. One of the amazing things about being a public hospital system is that we know how to bring outpatient services to places like this. So we made it a huge priority when we were doing this, not just to address kind of communicable diseases, but because people were arriving off of the bus and they had really serious medical issues that had been untreated, that they perhaps developed while they were making the journey. And we understood immediately that people were really going to need a lot of medical care. Again, that's why we have made sure to enroll people in Metro Health Plus, in Medicaid. We want people to get that health care. It's not in anybody's interest to kind of delay or defer that. And we've made it as no barrier as we can possibly make it. The people who are concerned about moving, I think, there's a couple of concerns and I'm happy to debunk them. I would say that number one, the standard, and you all will know this from shelter work, the standard accommodations for single adults in the shelter system and in general is congregate. The Watson Hotel was not congregate. People had their own hotel rooms or they had a roommate. The services were all kind of in the common spaces, but they had their own rooms. And so there are some folks who have said that they do not want to leave that. Unfortunately, we need that space for families with children. Like I started saying, well, like I started this presentation saying, families with children are really the top priority because there's so many families with children. We need the space, and we can't put them in a congregate facility for, I think, pretty obvious reasons. So folks have been engaged for the last week on why this move was happening. We've done in-person information sessions. We've canvassed door to door. The staff has really gone above and beyond to address concerns, talk about what the experience would be. And I will say there are over 400 people at the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal at this point. There is a small group that has kind of combined forces with some local organizers to oppose this. Their reasons for opposition beyond the accommodations and the congregate setting are things that we have not found to be true. The site is flush with food. The mayor actually posted a video at the site yesterday that you all can watch, and you can see where the food is. It's literally like a cafeteria. There are many bathrooms. The heating, I don't think anybody has seen anybody, the guests, not wearing shorts in there. That's how warm it is all the time. So, you know, we've really tried to go through bullet by bullet to dismantle information that was spread. And, you know, I want to say a thank you to Moya, because Moya's commissioner and many of their staff have been at the Watson now for a few days, like literally taking people hand by hand over to the cruise terminal to see what it is, to experience it, to understand that this is not, you know, maybe you're not going to have your own room at the cruise terminal, but it is certainly not, you know, this kind of scary place that it has been described as. A lot of the people who are protesting have never actually been to the terminal. They have heard, and they have kind of been, I would say, worked up or organized to believe that there are problems with it. But I will say it's still H&H providers there. You know, we have the same services at every site. The only difference being, obviously, we wouldn't have DOE at a single adult site. But I think, you know, it's important to call out that this is really, truly a crisis. You know, we are busting at the seams to make sure that people have the resources they need. Something I try to remember is that nowhere else in the country is providing anything like this, to the extent that the CBOs, who are, you know, the good guys in this scenario, are literally ticketing people up here because it's the only place in the country that's able to offer this level of support. And I think, you know, I would love if all of us could leave this thinking about how the federal government could replicate this model. It's not, it's a resource intensive model, but it's not the most large lift, especially when you have all of the resources of the federal government. And so, you know, I would just, that's kind of my response to that. You know, I'm happy to answer more questions about it, but I think that, you know, the mayor's office, the mayor, Moya, and many others have made a really valiant effort to try to clarify kind of what is actually happening.
Yeah, it was yesterday at the Watson. I'm talking with folks that weren't happy with the shift, and just talking them through everything that Laura mentioned. And also, when you talk to these folks, a lot of them are frustrated for things that have nothing to do with the city, have nothing to do with the services that city employees are providing, city agencies are providing. A lot of it is, why can't the mayor right now give me a work permit? We want to talk to the mayor, and it's not a very like easy conversation to have, like of federalism, and just that fundamentally it's beyond the purview of the mayor, it's beyond the purview of the city. And people talk about the challenges of family members back in home country, and these are challenges that we know about, and we're trying to support in every way we can, so that these folks have the means that they, within what's available to us, support their families, support themselves. But again, a lot of the frustrations extend far beyond anything we're doing.
And to give you a sense of kind of the scale, because I think it's helpful to call this out, folks will recall that during the height of the COVID epidemic, DHS opened up a lot of hotels to de-densify shelters, right? They didn't want people in congregate settings because of spread. they, even at that time, when they had opened up like an unprecedented number of hotels, it was maybe like 30 or 40 hotels. We are now over 80 emergency hotels. That is on top of the HERCs. So just to understand the scale, this is really, really unprecedented. And again, it is because we're the only place in the country that's doing this. I think one of the ironies of folks sending people up here on buses, they didn't know about right to shelter. They didn't know that we were required to provide these services. And then everybody kind of learned from that we were. And now there have been many places and many different groups on kind of both sides of the issue who are referring people into the HERCs and into DHS.
Thanks, Laura. Mary, I still see your hand is raised. You have a follow-up question?
Yeah, just last question. How many beds are on the in the cruise terminal, and how many bathrooms?
So the cruise terminal has the ability to fit roughly like a little bit over 1,000 people. I can get back to you on the number of bathrooms, but there were bathrooms already, and then we increased the amount of bathrooms.
So it's not like, as reported, 6 bathrooms?
No, we have met the one bathroom to 15 person ratio.
Additional questions from the committee? I have one in the interim. Laura, I understood that laundry was a problem for some of the families with children. Could you speak to that at all?
Yes. So this is something, I think one of the things that I love about working at H&H and this project is that there are a lot of problem solvers who are involved in this work. And when issues come to us, it's not just sort of the thing. We don't try to sort of distance ourselves from it. We try to resolve it. So the issue of laundry came to us. And so we now have instituted at all of the HERCs free laundry. There is like a specific cadence to it. So it's something like, floors 2 through 6 will have laundry drop off on Tuesday. Everybody can give 1 bag per person. It can be as large as they want the bag to be or as small as they want the bag to be. And then it's all returned within 1 or 2 days. So people have full laundry access. And in fact, in Randall's Island, which was a HERC that we don't operate anymore, an older HERC, there was like a whole laundry facility there. So.
Thank you. Additional questions? Joseph, I see your hand.
Thanks, Renee. Yeah, just a quick question. I was wondering about staffing, for such a large effort that had to get going so quickly. What did staffing look like for all of the support services, I guess, maintenance, operations, just logistics management? Like, where did those staff come from?
Yeah. So again, another thing that makes the HERCs a unique system is that each site is managed directly by H&H staff 24/7. So that kind of diverges from the way that shelters are run, where there's a nonprofit that gets the contract. The nonprofit does kind of all of the services, wrap around, and staffs it. We have H&H employees at every site, every hour of the day. They are there to troubleshoot, oversee things, make sure that everything is running properly, make sure that all the vendors that are there are interacting in a way that makes sense. So they really have an incredible array of responsibilities, and they're some of the most amazing people I think you'll ever meet, if you should meet them. And they oversee kind of the full umbrella. So we have different agencies that are in the sites, right? DOE's there. Other agencies have come in at different times to provide different services. For instance, at the Watson, DOT would come in because there were so many people with e-bikes. And so, this was all kind of, we have kind of an open door policy for anybody who's willing to bring those services in. Additionally, we have vendored staff by a couple of different corporations who do essentially just staffing. We also have a security contractor at the sites to make sure that interior and exterior security is safe and, everything is kind of orderly. The National Guard is at the row just to sort of help with logistics. They're not there for security, but, they help make sure that things are kind of orderly in the lobby as it's a really large place. We have the clinical staff are a vendor called DocGo, and then vaccinations at the row are done by another vendor called Affiliated Physicians, which some people here may have been vaccinated by if you got vaccinated at a Department of Health site for COVID. So, familiar faces to us. Then food is staffed by kind of a part of this bubble of staff, but there is a contractor we work with who's based in Long Island City. They're an MWBE contractor. They make all the food fresh, they bring it in, and then the staff kind of lays it out, make sure everything is flowing. And so the kind of short answer is there's a lot of people. It is both resource and staff intensive. But, I think each site has really figured out how to make this kind of harmonious relationship between all of these different groups on and integrate all of their services in.
Thanks. Can I ask a follow-up, Renee?
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, it's just, I guess kind of one of the aspects I was getting at was kind of like, especially with all the H&H staff, I mean, was it really just like an extremely rapid hiring process to increase the total number of staff that HHC has, or were these staff
No,
mostly diverted from other
necessarily. Yeah,
clinics versus hospitals?
yeah. So most of us who are in the leadership on the HERC response are in the ambulatory space in H&H. So, to be very nerdy about it, hospital systems, healthcare systems are kind of divided between emergent care and complex care and long-term care, and then ambulatory, which is like outpatient Gotham clinics. So the folks who are involved in this space come from that clinical ambulatory space and outpatient space. And prior to this, we were all working on test and trace, now rebranded as test and treat. We still have that as one of our day jobs, but clearly that kind of response there's less demand for that now. So, we had a little bit of room. We figured why not add this as well. So we have a lot of folks who moved over from test and trace and from ambulatory who are working on this. In fact, the other day I was at the Row and ran into a guy who had helped run the testing site that was at JFK, and then later on helped to run the vaccination site that was at Citi Field. And now he's here helping with operations. So, people kind of continue to get redeployed. And they're all awesome people, and proud to work with them.
Thanks a lot.
Mary, I see, is your hand still raised, or was that from before?
No, sorry, it's done.
Okay. Additional questions from the committee? Any questions from the committee? I have one last one. You were saying that it may be like 6 years, and I guess until someone can get their hearing. Is it the case that the expectation is that some of these families will stay in the hotels for that period of time?
So I was saying that more as an example of how long it can take. Moya can talk about, I don't know the exact average, but for us, our commitment is that we will run these hotels as long as that is kind of the task at hand. I don't know long term what that means, but for us right now, every day, we are working hard to make these kind of the best experience, the most supported experience. And I think if you ask folks who are living in these sites, they would tell you that, it has reflected that.
I think to follow up on that, clients are looking for self-sufficiency. They want to be able to work and support each other. And just because they have that asylum seeker tag on them doesn't mean that for the body of the time that they're seeking asylum, they're going to be seeking city services that are stood up for this operation. People eventually want to be supporting themselves, and they want to be getting the same city services as everyone else. So I guess at 6 years, that's not the expectation that people will be needing this level of support. Eventually they'll be integrated into the fabric of the city, or if not, move on elsewhere where they can be integrated into the fabric of that city and state.
Would a family move in that scenario as they get their work permits and things? Would they move from a HERC to a DHS site and then sort of get those services? You know what I mean? Try to find that housing through that avenue.
Anybody. I mean, anybody can, they could choose to. There's nothing prohibiting that. We are not referring people into DHS at this point. If people are getting work and they're collecting money, then, that's kind of, we've sort of let that be their deal. But, we've also found that people are very motivated to work. Like, I should just say this, any site you go to, the first thing people say is like, how can I work? And a lot of people are working.
Mhm.
You know, we know that people are getting OSHA certified. We know that people are working in the service industry. So we're aware of it. We've, you know, kind of tried to take like a harm reduction approach, and, you know, help people understand what their rights are while they kind of wait for official authorization. But it's a very challenging space because at the same time, you know, working in New York City, it can be very challenging to find somewhere affordable. And also, folks are not eligible for the same kind of subsidies and incentives that other folks would be who are, you know, not seeking asylum or who are kind of, you know, US citizens.
And when I said transition, it's transition into the private housing market and communities where, where someone will rent to them, where they'll be able to find housing. So it's not transition over to another system, but transition into what's available for everyone. Which I guess is, if there's no more questions for Laura, I can jump in. Thank you, Laura. That was a really great overview. I think we work with a lot of people in common. I worked pretty closely with Teresa Doherty, who is one of my favorite people. But yeah, just to continue, just some of the points that Laura had mentioned. So since the beginning of last year, an unprecedented volume of asylum seekers have arrived in New York City seeking safety and refuge from violence, persecution, and economic collapse in their home countries. So initially, most of the people were from the country of Venezuela, which has much publicized economic and political collapse, but there's been changes in border policy that have changed a little bit of the composition of folks arriving. So with this population generally, unlike most previous migrant communities arriving in New York City, most of them do not have friends or families to support their integration. So many of them are residing in the shelter system in the HERCs. But what the city is trying to do is find as many ways as we can support them towards that goal of self-sufficiency, of being able to live in the city, be integrated into the larger fabric of the city. So the City of New York has launched a number of initiatives to support our new neighbors. One of them is the Asylum Seeker Resource Navigation Center, which I'm the on-the-ground lead for, which is a central place where newly arrived asylum seekers can go for free and confidential help accessing important services and resources that will help them in that integration process. So a lot of information is there through direct services or through referrals, including medical screenings with the DocGo folks that Laura was talking about, healthcare insurance enrollment, Metro Plus, school enrollment, and then an immigration legal orientation. So just getting people to understand the basics of their immigration process, what's required, where to find attorneys if they decide to go down the private route, which a lot of folks are doing, despite just arriving in a new city, a new country, and just starting to work. A lot of people are getting private attorneys, but we want to make sure that when they do pursue private options, that they're not being scammed. There's quite a few scammers out there. Immigration, legal fraud, notarial fraud is a big problem even before this current situation, and we want to make sure that we're protecting people as much as we can. The City of New York is also trying to stand up this larger operation to support as many folks as we can. But again, one of the big stumbling blocks that we're facing is the capacity of the organizations that do this type of work, and also the scale of folks who are arriving, that it's on a different level than what we're used to, but we have some really great people working on that operation. Also, since there is just compounding levels of trauma that folks have faced, both leaving their home country, the situations that forced them to leave, the journey, a lot of them getting bused to a city that they didn't know anyone, and not really getting much information of what they would face. We have an emotional support team, a DOHMH REST team, which conducts psychological first aid. So just getting people, so yeah, that REST team walks around the navigation center, gets people the supports they need. If they're in distress, if they're in crisis, just getting them to a point where they can navigate the services that day, and then connecting them to longer term services. And the navigation was the first center open to provide these host of services, but in the last few months, we've opened satellite sites throughout the 5 boroughs. So the navigation center that I'm working from is on the outskirts of Community Board 5. It's on 10th and 49th at the Red Cross headquarters. So it's in Midtown West. But since then, we've opened, in collaboration with partner organizations, CBOs, we've opened a ton that provide more specialized services, including workforce development, getting people that OSHA training, letting them know about their rights, their labor rights and what's available to them. Additional organizations providing legal orientations, referrals to clothes, food, all types of support. And those are, again, throughout the 5 boroughs. And yeah, this is really like a new type of crisis. We're dealing with it in real time. One of the metaphors we use pretty consistently is that we've been building the plane as we go. Like it's already taken off and we're building it. We're trying to do right by these new New Yorkers, provide them the supports that they need to integrate into the city. And the intention has always been, as with all immigrant communities, to integrate them and to allow them to have self-sufficiency. The goal is not to, for people to be in city care longer than necessary, but we do understand that, as with any big transition, there's some support is necessary in the city to make sure people are getting the support they need.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's a top level overview. A lot of what I was going to cover was already covered by Laura, but yeah, I'm open to any questions that folks might have.
Thank you, Derek. Questions from the committee? Derek, I have a question. Is your department expanding? You must have just, to Joseph's question, if you're staffing. Have you?
So the navigation center where I'm working from is in collaboration with Catholic Charities. So it's through a city contract. So they staffed up for it, including a lot of folks on temp contracts that at the conclusion of the contract will either be hired by Catholic Charities or we'll have to find other employment. Moya is expanding quite a bit in terms of language access. That's something that we're finding that there's a lot of needs. And there's other positions, but we're working primarily in collaboration and through contracting with CBOs that have expertise and are able to staff up a little quicker than we are.
Understood. Questions from the committee? I'm seeing none. I'm just going to move to attendees. If I see no questions, it looks like I have a question from an attendee, but I'm not sure who that is. It's Zul Zukovitz. You have a question?
I do. Thank you, Renee, members of the committee, Vicky. I would have directed it to Laura if she was still with us. I'm directing it to you, Derek, if you don't mind. Oh, hello, Laura. Thank you. So to the two of you, as you feel necessary to answer. So I'm going to preface it concisely. I've been working with the Street Homelessness Advocacy Project, SHAP, initiated by Norman Siegel, Bob Hayes, many other long-term homeless and housing advocates. Shout out to Mary Braz. And we're working with the most intractable people who've been in and out of Bellevue throughout the congregate shelter system, trying to get them into welcome hotels, stabilization beds. And as you guys know, these resources are very, very limited. And that's a very different population from this incredible wave of immigrants and, of course, women and children who we really do need to prioritize. However, let me say this. It's so hard to get people settled. And when we find them, getting into a room, getting services they need, getting a job, to then cause them a setback because of our failure in planning, I think that's rather disturbing. So I'd like you to address that issue. And we have folks, who very quickly got on their feet and already have jobs, and we're moving them, an hour away from these jobs. So let's please discuss that. Thank you, Renee.
Yeah, look, I think that as I said when I started to talk about this, the families with children population remains the population that is the largest, both in our system and the DHS system. We're talking about little kids. We're talking about kids that were born on the journey here. We're talking about people who are walking off the bus and giving birth, like the day they walk off the bus. So, it's very hard to plan for that, quite frankly. I think what we've been able to do is to meet the obligation and then go beyond, really providing this incredible new model. I think that the transition itself for at least half of the population in the Watson has been extremely smooth. People really do understand kind of why this was necessary and have moved over to the cruise terminal, are there now, are having a fine experience. They have access to the ferry. It's free for them. The ferry is literally right next to where they are staying, and they can be in downtown Manhattan maybe more quickly than they could have been even at 57th Street. So I totally appreciate that it's a challenge. On the other hand, the challenge is it's a challenge across the board. So that may not be a satisfying answer to you, but that is the response. Folks have been incredibly resilient. We totally acknowledge how challenging these journeys are. And everybody has a different story. And that's part of why we have so many services, is to be able to address everybody differently, to be able to refer folks into H&H, into the Roberto Clemente Center. Again, we have a dedicated pathway for people who are showing signs of distress into the Survivors of Torture Clinic, into the center. We want to make sure that's all getting addressed. But I would just say that there are a lot of different experiences for folks kind of in the Herc, at the Watson, at the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal. And I think, I would just recommend that we think about the broader set of experiences that maybe are not kind of the ones getting the most attention right now, but really important to remember that, this is, like I said, about the expansion of the DHS shelter hotels. It is the rate of growth for people coming into the city and requesting help and us wanting to provide it is truly unprecedented.
Renee, you're on mute.
Yeah, I see that. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for your answer. I see we have a question from Charles, who is an attendee. Charles, do you have a question?
We can also map it out.
Hello, hi there. I had a question. There was a ABC News report about some of the food at one of the hotels. Some employees were reporting that there was a lot of food wastage. I was wondering, when there's food that isn't being used, is there any chance that it could be transferred to some of our New York City shelters, so it's not being thrown in the trash? I was just wondering, could it be put to further good use? And I was also wondering, how many, I don't know if you have any statistics or if you noticed any people who have traveled from, Mexico or other countries who have disabilities, and how are these hotels set up for, people with maybe physical disabilities or mobility disabilities or visual disabilities? Thank you.
Yeah, so great questions. In terms of food, when we first started, we kind of made this assumption that for every person, you need the exact number of meals, right? So one person, one sandwich, for instance, we used to call it. We've since realized that it's a bit more complicated, the calculus. Kids are in school, they're getting lunch in school maybe. So we've learned that we can kind of be wiser about the way that we calculate how much food is needed on a daily basis. We've also created relationships to be able to donate food should there be excess food. But we also, it's a balance. We don't want people to ever feel like they don't have enough food, they don't have, enough snacks. One of the main things that we see in terms of kind of health issues, and it segues into your next question nicely, is malnutrition in children and adults, because they haven't had access to great produce or, meals in their journeys. And so we didn't want people to feel like they couldn't access that. So again, it's a balance. And I think, we have been able to figure out a better way to kind of estimate how much food we need. So that's been really important. In terms of disabilities, we have certain folks who require sign language interpretation, which we offer. We used to offer it via in-person. We've now switched to virtual. It's just kind of more easy to use, easier on everybody, essentially, the user, the person who's interacting. We have an ADA coordinator at every site to make sure that folks have accommodations if they need them. Typical things, there were a lot of injuries on the journey that I don't think you would necessarily describe as sort of, a person with a disability, but certainly people need treatment for things like foot wounds. They've been walking. And so we do a lot of that, and through enrolling people in Medicaid, what we really want to be able to do is to get folks in a continuum of care, right? Managing every single thing piecemeal is not ideal from a healthcare perspective. We want to get people into primary care. So again, they get connected to Medicaid, to Metro Health Plus. We can make them an appointment with one of our FQHCs or with one of the ones that is near the site that's not in the H&H system. And folks can immediately start getting other types of care they need, whether it's a vision test, a hearing test. And so that's really kind of the pipeline, sort of the emergent issues are triaged up front, and then we want to make sure you can get long-term care if you need it.
Yeah, sorry,
Thank
just
you.
one quick thing on the Medicaid front. Sorry, my last question. I'm a Medicaid user myself, and I have been concerned that I've noticed a lot of providers here in Manhattan, especially, a lot of them have stopped taking Medicaid. I've been having a lot of doctors send me letters saying, I'm so sorry, this provider doesn't accept Medicaid anymore. And then sometimes, Medicaid recipients have to go far off into Brooklyn or the Bronx or far off into Queens. I've noticed a big exodus in Manhattan of Medicaid providers, doctors that accept Medicaid. Is there any way of working on trying to encourage providers to take Medicaid more in Manhattan, especially since some of these hotels are based in Manhattan? So, to save people who are not used to the city having to travel to the deepest areas of the Bronx or Brooklyn or somewhere else like that.
Well said. One of the advantages of being the public hospital system is that we have access to all of our own facilities, our hospitals, our Gotham sites. We have a ton of Gotham sites. I think people don't even realize necessarily how many we have in Manhattan and elsewhere. All of those sites are going to accept Medicaid. They are not set up to really expect a high level of insurance beyond Medicaid, I would say. This is the whole barrier-free system that we are proud to operate.
Thank you, Laura. Any additional, and I just need to remind the committee members, we need to keep your videos on for the duration of the meeting, please. Thank you. Any additional questions from the committee? Checking very quickly and seeing none. I want to thank you, Laura and Derek. You were fantastic tonight in answering all our questions. You're doing Trojan's work. We really, really appreciate hearing from you. It's amazing the work that you're doing at the scale that you're doing it. So thank you so much for being here tonight, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night. Thanks for having us.
Bye. Thank you. I just want to call out, we have in our attendees, Robin Forst. She's also from the mayor's office. And I don't know if you want to say hello, Robin. I know that you are our new CB5 rep. So I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you do want to say hello to everyone at this point, please feel free to do so. Robin, I think you can speak now.
Okay, we're getting there.
And hi.
Hi.
Nice to see everybody. Thank you. Those were two, I thought, incredibly informative presentations, not just because I work for the city, but I thought it was really well done. Vicky, I've not met you yet, but I look forward to meeting you. I am the Manhattan Borough Director at the Mayor's Office of Community Affairs. And you are one of the community boards that I will be working with, or I am working with. And while I will generally be at your full board meetings, I will, if my schedule permits, come to some of the committee meetings. And I was particularly interested in coming to this one. So thank you, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you so much, Robin. We're delighted to meet you and look forward to working with you as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our final issue tonight, our final item on the agenda is a discussion of the preliminary budget. As the BEX committee members know, community boards are required to comment on the city's preliminary budget 1 month after the budget's released. So that means coming up in February. So I've asked the other chairs and the other committees to add their comments. But here tonight, I'd like to hear from you, members of the committee, and members of the public, because this allows us to tell the mayor what we think about the impact of the citywide budget policies, react to the agency funding recommendations, support all the decisions that we like. And we can, continue to provide evidence as we did in our budget requests about why we support certain budget proposals, and tell us about any changes in our community. So you were all sent copies of the respond to our local budget requests, as well as the funding information for the preliminary budget for the fiscal year 2024. It's balanced at $102.7 billion. That's lower than it was in the November plan. I assume you've all gone through, and if you have done, you'll see that a number of the requests have not been funded, or they require further study. This is a response we've gotten every single year. But we need to corral our comments and do it via agency when making our response. So I'm going to ask you, the committee, if you have any comments that you would like to add to this letter that will be, Julie and I, as usual, will be working on the letter that will be sent out from the committee in response to the preliminary budget. Any comments from members of the committee as you look through? I'm seeing none. I'll just start us off. If you take a look at the capital requests, our top 7, I'd say, more or less involve the Department of Housing Preservation, HPD, right? And in each instance, each of our requests, we're looking for ways to provide housing in the district, which everybody agrees is desperately needed. You can see in the budget that the staffing remains unchanged in HPD. And there's little increase in monies going to the agency, but we do know that the mayor has said housing is one of his priorities. So I think in our letter, we should be highlighting HPD, and ask the city to look seriously again at our requests and our ideas to do things like expand the loan programs to rehabilitate multiple dwelling units, create a capital city fund administered by HPD. All of the things that are in there, I think we have a good argument to, again, ask those agency requests be looked at again. You'll see that the New York Public Library, you've probably heard that the New York Public Library is one of the agencies that's going to be, I don't want to use the word defunded, but will have less funds available to it. We've asked for HVAC and roof repair at the Andrew Haskell branch. And they've asked, that we reach out to them. So we will do that. But do we have any thoughts on, say, the library cuts that are supposedly coming? I just want to get the committee's input on any of the budget responses and requests.
I have a clarifying question, Renee.
Yes,
You don't mind?
go ahead.
So,
Sure.
so in this letter you're drafting, is the objective is it more to respond to the city's response to our last year's submission of the budget, or is it more to give some draft responses to the preliminary budget that was just released by the city?
So it's a little bit of both. You will see the documents that I sent to you did you all receive the documents that I sent last week, right? So you will see the city's response to our budget requests and dovetailing that with the budget the preliminary budget that has been announced, we have this opportunity. In fact, we are required, and we've done this every year. We get the chance to write this letter. We tell the mayor what we think about the impact of the citywide budget policies. You know, do we like the fact that the NYPD budget remains flat? You know, while certain things like the libraries are going to be cut. I mean, this is our opportunity to really restate our budget requests, to agree or disagree. I mean, certainly if you look at, we had a lot of requests to the Department of Sanitation, whose budget was increased, right, under this preliminary budget. So in terms of the Department of Sanitation requests, the funding has been maintained and increased. So many of our requests are accommodated. Like we requested the purchase of more multi-purpose machines with plows to clear the bike lanes. I mean, those requests were agreed to. So in those instances, our letter would reflect for the Department of Sanitation, you know, we think that's great. DOT is another agency. We made a lot of requests and surprisingly many are supported, like the request for the permanency of the temporary Broadway plazas. You know, there may be things that we disagree with. Julie is very not happy with the Parks Department's budget on public bathrooms, for instance. And so that would be something that we would include because we've asked for toilets, right? Public toilets, and we've asked for, and that is not included. So it's just a reiteration, Joseph. It might be, does that clarify for you?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
Okay. So any additional, and we have done this every year. It's a letter that comes out of BACS. Julie and I pen it based on the comments that come out of the committees, the other committees, and this committee. So, and it's based on the responses that we got. Is there any comments from any members of this committee regarding the budget, the documents that were sent to you, the preliminary budget and the response? Okay, I'm seeing Chuck. Go ahead, Chuck.
I'm going to admit, Renee, that I haven't had a chance to look at what you sent, and so I'm
Okay.
speaking a little bit out of ignorance. My thought to you is that housing being as important to the committee and the board as it has been, I think we should look for opportunities to restate the boards and the committee's focus on housing and affordable housing, and to the extent we can encourage the mayor to wet up what we've proposed with what he most recently has proposed as his priorities. I think that would be a really positive thing to do, and I'm happy to help on that offline, and apologize that I didn't get a chance to look at the documents.
Thank you, Chuck. That's exactly what I was talking about with HPD, which is one of the housing priorities. You know, several of the requests involved HPD on housing, exactly that, dovetailing it with what the mayor has announced in terms of his priorities. So, and yes, Julie and I will take you up on your offer. Now you're stuck. So thank you. Bradley.
Thank you. Yeah. My question is, and this is sort of a question rather than an answer like you're requesting, but for these requests where they basically just sort of kick the can down the road, they say a further study is needed or something like that. How do we typically respond to things like that? Because it's not really like there are a few hard no's in here, but a lot of them are just sort of, I don't know, we have to look at this further. Do we?
So
I guess I've asked my question. Go ahead.
Right. So traditionally, I mean, further study is something that we traditionally hear again and again and again, and we tend to take those budget requests and carry them over from year to year so that the city understands that these are priorities for us. But this year, if you recall, we had OMB come to our meeting and they said they'd actually work with us. So the plan is now to reach out to OMB and have them, and not negotiate, that's not the correct word, but understand, what does this really mean? So we're gonna try and use that and leverage their agreement to help us with exactly that question. Because before it was sort of a kick the can down the road, requires further study. What did that mean? You know, how, why? If we said a pothole on 34th Street, how does that require further study? It's right there. But now we're going to use that OMB leverage and talk to them and see if they can help us work with the agency and sort of see if we can facilitate that, whatever that further study needs to be.
But sorry to follow up on that. I see a number of those say contact the community, the community board unit at the OMB. So those, I think that makes a lot of sense, but on the ones where they haven't said that, is that still sort of that soft no that we're,
That's still that soft no, but we're still going to have that conversation.
got it.
And then,
Thank you.
then again, we'll carry that over. We tend to carry
So,
these
yeah, year
out
after year.
to just to keep reiterating our interest in those budget requests.
Great, thank you.
So now,
I was gonna say that I thought the response regarding the fire department generators was pretty good and thoughtful as a response, because it gave context for like federal nature of the funding, the importance of having excess capacity. So just wanted to highlight that one. Kind of building off of what Bradley said, I think it would be great in our discussions with OMB to see if we can push the agencies towards some kind of time-bound studies. So when they say we'll research it, if we could say, oh, it'd be great if we could have some kind of progress before the next budget cycle by X month. And then kind of related to that is in terms of their response to our request about, you know, the director of a public realm that feels like maybe they didn't really like understand what the messaging was, and they like pointed it back to the community board's budget. But it sounds like it'll be helpful just to talk through that live with the OMB team.
exactly. That's exactly what we're going to do. Thank you. I like the comment about the fire department, and we can use that as one of the ones that we found terrific, right? So thank you. Additional questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to switch it to members of the public to see if they have any comments. Charles, I see your hand.
Hi. So I think saving the libraries is important. As a person who is familiar with the Andrew Haskell Braille Talking Book Library. They do a lot of good work, and they have a lot of wonderful events for people who are blind and visually impaired. Actually, today I was at an art tactile art group, and it's really great for people who are blind and visually impaired to be able to have a place to socialize, to also get training such as with assistive technology. So I think it's very important, if possible, to try to keep these libraries funded, especially ones that specialize for communities that need extra help, such as the blind and visually impaired. And I also think with affordable housing, that if there could be also a focus on ADA apartments. There is in I forgot which community board it is, I do apologize, but there is Sellis Manor for which is a building specifically for the blind community, but that's just one in the whole 5 boroughs, and maybe that could be looked into of is it possible to have another apartment building specializing specifically for tenants with disabilities, to be created in Manhattan or something like that, especially with the population as we get older, more and more of us sometimes have disabilities and things like that, so that I'm sure there must be a need for more specialized housing options. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. We will take those comments on board and include them in our response for sure. Thank you for those comments. Anything else on the budget from members of the committee? Again, the letter will be prepared, and Robin. Hi. Did you want to jump in, Robin? You're muted.
Hi, no, I just wanted to say that I have to leave for another meeting at 7:30 and wanted to thank you. Very good meeting, and I will see you all at a meeting soon. So
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Kim, I see your hand.
Hey there. Hey, Renee. Thanks so much. I also am admittedly reviewing this in real time. And I would say the feedback and attention to kind of the futures of kids in our district is mixed, if at best. I am happy to see the comment on, expanding with new seats and a potential new school. And so the response there that there is the identified seat need and that a location is being scouted. It's, interesting. I can provide some comments on email, but, between that and really, I think advocating for the accessibility requests that we've been making for years would be the two that I would continue to kind of elevate.
Great. I can include those and anything that you want to send offline as well. I mean, the preliminary budget did allocate, I think it's 30.7 billion to DOE in fiscal 2024. And that's a decrease from the 31.2 that the city was spending this fiscal year. So it is a decrease. They said that they're not laying off any teachers, but there are various layoffs. So I know that the budget is constrained, and
Right.
the city's facing, the city is sort of facing some dire new unfunded costs. I mean, we heard that from OMB when they came, related to asylum seekers, the labor deals, and the healthcare deals that the city is grappling with at the moment. So there are shortfalls coming apparently. So there's some belt tightening, but certainly we can advocate for, and we always have done, for those seats.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I think those two priorities, and I do recognize all those things, and hence I'm willing to let some of the other items go that were kind of rolled out of budget already.
Okay, any more comments? Joseph?
Thanks. You might have already, you or Julie might have already been looking through this, but reviewing this, the city council's response to the budget, I thought had some really helpful points for us to use. So, I was just kind of tying a few, it's like broken down by section, and especially for the housing items. I'm happy to highlight those offline if you haven't already gone through this, but there were some sections of that city council response that I think apply directly to the asks that we made that were not met in the preliminary budget, that were not responded to favorably last year in our budget request.
Yeah, we've looked at a lot of those, but if whatever you have that you want to send over to particularly highlight, that would be great. We'll make sure that your comments are included, because housing certainly was our number one priority, is always our number one priority, apart from the public realm, but housing has been right up there. So all of those comments are valid. And Joe?
I admit I am going through it now. What is the timeline, and when would you want comments so we can meet this February 15th deadline?
Honestly, yesterday, no, but I just, as soon as possible. The deadline for the letter to be completed and submitted is February 15th, right? So we need to turn this around fairly quickly. So any comments that you have, if you could send them to Julie and I as soon as you have them,
okay,
it would be much appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no more comments, I am going to ask the committee if there are any items of new business. Joe, I see your hand raised, but I think it's from before.
Well, I don't know if you remember when I have a keen interest on the differences between the city's budget and its financial statements or its financial position. So I was wondering if we would be okay with asking the Independent Budget Office to do some sort of analysis between some of the major differences between what the budget is every year and what the city's financial position really is. And what am I really getting at? There are unfunded pension and unfunded post-retirement benefit plans. So I would love to hear their, focus in, their last presentation, the budget's balanced, everything sounds hunky-dory, but, we have numbers that are twice the size of the city's entire budget, which are unfunded and are going to be coming due. So I would love to hear their take on it and maybe have them study it and come up with ways of addressing it. I thought they had a testimony, and I looked on their website, but I couldn't find it. I thought they testified related to some fringe benefits or post-employment, post-retirement benefits, but I couldn't find it. So I wanted to gauge your thoughts on reaching out to them to ask them to look into this matter and put this on their agenda to do some research at some point.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, they have invited us to make those sort of requests. And I remember that we did this about 2 years ago at your behest. I believe it was about 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And that was a very scary conversation. So I assume it's only going to be scarier. Should we do that? But I agree with you. I think that would be a great request, and I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to reach out to them. And when you're talking about this, Joe, what are you talking about? You're talking about the unfunded. Are you talking about Medicare, the Medicare and Medicaid plans? Or are you talking about
I'm talking about, they have post-retirement, post-employment benefits that city employees get. And that is I believe it's the worst offender. It's really unfunded. It's like 4% funded or something like that. And we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. Like healthcare for life, and and then there's also the pension plan, which is better funded, substantially better funded. But in aggregate, those two components really, the city's finances are really at the whim of having to pay, those dollars. So addressing that, and besides being a CPA and a partner at a firm, I also teach. So I'm part of the city's retirement, plan. Something's got to change in the long run. So I'd love to hear their take on it.
Thank you, Joe.
I could put I could email you a request to ask them.
That would be fantastic. Really appreciate that and happy to do that.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Any other comments from members of the committee? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to turn it and ask if anybody else has any other items of new business. And I'm seeing none, so I'm going to thank everyone for their attendance this evening and their participation. I would ask if you have additional comments that were not made tonight about the budget and the budget requests and the response to our budget requests and the preliminary budget, to please send those to Julie and I as soon as possible so that they may be incorporated into the letter that is required to be sent to the city. And with that, I will wish everyone good evening.
Thank you, Renee.
Good night.
Thanks, Renee.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.